The Royal Commission into the Robodebt scandal has handed down its findings into the unlawful scheme, recommending its architects be referred for criminal and civil prosecution. A former Queensland Chief Justice Catherine Holmes' report into the Morrison government's automated debt-raising policy includes 57 recommendations, and it is the culmination of hundreds of hours of evidence, thousands of exhibits and nearly 1 million documents. A sealed chapter, separate to the bound report, recommends referrals of individuals for civil and criminal prosecution. In the report, Commissioner Holmes states that those individuals will not be named publicly. However, the report states that former Prime Minister Scott Morrison misled Cabinet by not providing all the relevant information. Commissioner Holmes writes he failed to meet his ministerial responsibility to ensure that Cabinet was properly informed about what the proposal actually entailed and to ensure that it was lawful. Now, responding to the report, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says the Royal Commission has revealed a gross betrayal and a human tragedy.
It was wrong, it was illegal, it should never have happened, and it should never happen again. Under the former Liberal government, this scheme unlawfully raised $1.76 billion in alleged debts against some 526,000 Australians. This tragedy caused stress, anxiety, financial destitution, and sadly had a very real human toll. For more than 4 years, Liberal ministers dismissed or ignored the significant concerns that were raised over and over again, including in the Parliament, but also by victims, by public servants, by community organisations, and of course legal experts. The Royal Commission has found that the Liberal Party's Robodebt scheme was, to quote, a crude and cruel mechanism, neither fair nor legal, and it made many people feel like criminals. In essence, people were traumatised on the off chance they might owe money. It was a costly failure of public administration in both human and economic terms.
Reporter Brittany Klein joins us now from Brisbane. Brittany, this is a comprehensive report, but the most anticipated section is sealed.
It certainly is, and the Prime Minister touched on that. He says even he hasn't seen the sealed section of the report, nor has Federal Government Services Minister Bill Shorten, but it has been passed on to the relevant people and the relevant authorities. What we do know in that chapter is there are referrals that individuals be referred to for further investigation, whether that be civil or criminal prosecution. Catherine Holmes wrote in the opening pages of her report that she recommends that this additional chapter remain sealed so as not to prejudice the conduct of any future prosecution. This 990-page report by the Commissioner, Catherine Holmes, was handed to the Governor-General earlier this morning before it was made public and tabled in Parliament. What we do know and what we have seen, which has been made public, are the 57 recommendations, which include having more people at the coalface and bringing more humans back into human service delivery. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, who we heard from a short time ago, has thanked the victims of Robodebt who have been at the centre of this Royal Commission. They were among the 115 witnesses who gave evidence during 9 weeks of hearings here in Brisbane. To come to these recommendations, Commissioner Catherine Holmes has had to go through 5,000 pages of transcripts from those victims, from their families, and politicians, even 2 former Prime Ministers who gave evidence to the Royal Commission, which began last year and continued in the early months of this year. What was reiterated through the Commission and has been reiterated in this report is that high-level government officials were notified several times of the illegal nature and the unlawfulness of Robodebt, but they never tried to stop it.
Brittany, people are at the centre of this, and we know many of them in quite vulnerable positions, and some of the damage can't be undone.
It certainly can't. Among those 115 witnesses who gave evidence at the Royal Commission in Brisbane were mothers who lost their sons, men who took their own lives after receiving these fault death notices. And they're the most tragic circumstances, but there are More than 400,000 similar stories of Australians who received those false debt notices between 2015 and 2019. The Prime Minister today thanked all of the victims who came forward for their bravery. He described the Robodebt scheme as a gross negligence of human betrayal. Federal Government Services Minister Bill Shorten called it a major gaslighting of the Australian public.
And people tried to speak up along the way. We heard from the Prime Minister just a short time ago saying that this is a wake-up call for the public service to be able to give frank and fearless advice, and certainly recommendations surrounding this, Brittany.
Recommendations, and that was also a key theme of the Royal Commission during the hearings here in Brisbane, that there was a major culture problem and that many public servants were fearful of speaking up. They understood the unlawful nature of the Robodebt scheme, but were fearful of speaking up to their bosses or to the ministers in charge. Former ministers Stuart Robert and Christian Porter were among those who gave evidence at the Royal Commission, and they admitted to giving false information to the Australian public about this scheme. So a lot of public servants that I've spoken to who no longer work for the public service, but they say this cultural shift needs to happen from the top. And like you said, they were part of the recommendations made by former Queensland Supreme Court Judge and Commissioner Catherine Holmes.
And so, Brittany, we've got the recommendations that have come from this, the final report tabled, the sealed section as well. So what can we say as to what happens from here?
Well, the report was only handed down about 90 minutes ago, and both the Prime Minister and the Minister, the Federal Government Services Minister, Bill Shorten, were quick to say that they even haven't had a chance to read the whole report. So that, of course, will be the first priority, and there are many journalists around the country and no doubt victims too of Robodebt who are trawling through this report. We understand that there's likely to be a task force now going through all of the 57 recommendations, and as the Prime Minister says, to ensure that something like Robodebt never happens again in Australia.